guys, welcome to another episode of Toxic Crime Tuesdays. So if you're new to my channel, hi, how are you? My name is Shannon Green, and every single Tuesday I speak about a true crime case that has inspired me to speak out and share with you all. So if you follow me on social media and you have watched my previous videos, then you would know that I actually missed last week's episode. And if you have me on Instagram, you would have seen that I have been really ill. I don't know what it is. It was some kind of mystery illness. I did think it was COVID, but I took a test and it was negative. I did think it was COVID because which I rarely ever get when I get a cold, I had no sense of taste or smell or anything. It was awful. I couldn't even enjoy my morning coffee. It was awful. I hated it. So yeah, I'm just kind of recovering at the minute. I'm still not 100%, but I do feel a lot better, and I just wanted to do this video. I just want to get this episode out there because it's really sad, because this case I heard about a while ago. I think I was quite young. Yeah, I was quite young when it happened. So when it actually happened, I obviously didn't know about. But I had heard about it a few years ago, and then I come across, I think Ellen and Neil done an episode about this particular case, but weirdly there isn't much other coverage on it. There's just not enough information out there on any kind of media outlet, which really upsets me because this case is huge and it's so deeply upsetting, and it contains a lot of different themes that I feel like should be spoken about. So I definitely felt like I needed to research this case a bit more thoroughly and speak about it and share with all of you guys. Hopefully you guys have heard about it, but if you haven't, then I'm glad that I'm bringing you some awareness. So this case is just horrific. It's one that seemed completely unnecessary and just beyond disturbing. Becoming a parent for the first time is truly terrifying, especially when it's not in your plan. But it is also the most wonderful and most surreal feeling, especially as soon as you see that tiny little baby for the first time and you see him look up at you. There's just no feeling like it, and there's just no way to describe it. And for me and for most people, you go from, you know, just being a person, being you, and then literally as soon as that baby's there, even though you're spending like 9 months preparing yourself, you're never fully prepared for what happens. And the second that baby's here, you just switch into parental mode, and just all these kind of instincts and feelings just kick in, and it's just insane. It's like, with me, I've always loved my sleep. I really have. I always have at least 8 hours every single night, and yeah, if I get woken up through the night, or if I get woken up early, I am so grumpy for the rest of the day. So I really felt like I was going to struggle when my son arrived with the sleepless nights and everything else, but I didn't. It's just weird. It was just like a light switch. Like, anytime he cried for his milk or got up, or I would just naturally get up before he was due his milk anyway. It was just weird. It was just some weird kind of sixth sense instinct thing where you just automatically get up and there's no grumpiness, no ill feeling, no resentment. You just do it and you just get on with it, and it's fine. And you just, you know, your baby becomes the forefront of everything, and you're okay with it. And it can become overwhelming at times, when sometimes I think a lot of parents have some kind of identity crisis, and that is totally normal. But you still understand that your baby comes first. Sadly for some parents were not supposed to be parents. Some people, I think, have some kind of expectations for their children and for who they want their children to be. And when their children don't exceed those expectations, or they don't turn out how they want them to be, they kind of cast them aside. And this is pretty much what happens in today's case. So this is the story of Shafilea Ahmed. And oh, just before I get into it, I've forgotten already. I just want to say that if, like me, you are a desktop detective and for some strange reason you like the sound of my voice, then please click the subscribe button, because I'm here for you guys every single Tuesday, unless I'm ill, which hopefully I won't be for a while. So this is the story of Shafilea Ahmed. Shafilea was a beautiful, intelligent and compassionate young girl who had a really bright future ahead of herself. Shafilea came from a very conservative and strict Muslim family who had some unrealistic goals and ideals for their daughter. Shafilea rejected her parents' beliefs. Growing up in the UK, she became accustomed to Western cultures and become very interested in them. She liked to dress a certain way, she wanted to wear nail varnish, she wanted to wear makeup, she wanted to dye her hair, all the kind of things that her peers were doing. And these are the kind of things that her parents were really not happy with and were very much against. So growing up in the UK, she longed for a European-based lifestyle, rejecting the possibilities of an arranged marriage, which that was the tradition throughout generations of the Ahmed family. She wanted to do, I don't know, the standard life milestones, you know, obviously going to school, then maybe going to college, sixth form, and then perhaps going to university or just going straight into work, and then starting a relationship on her own terms, and then perhaps maybe doing some of the relationship kind of milestones, you know, like meeting someone and then you're with them for quite a while and then you move in or you get engaged and maybe get married or get a dog or get kids, have kids, or maybe get a cat or a snake, whatever. That, you know, she just wanted a life where it happened organically, where it wasn't planned out for her. She could just decide what she wanted and when, which I think is completely fair enough, and I think everyone should be able to do so. So, like always, we need to go right back to the beginning. Just before I actually get into the facts and about Shafelea's background, I just want to say that this case mainly revolves around a particular religion, which is Islam. And this is a particular religion that I feel like it generates a lot of negativity, which I don't think is fair. At the end of the day, Shafelea's parents, Iftikhar and Fazana, they originated in Pakistan, and they themselves come from very strict families who had specific goals and traditions that they expected their children to follow, and then when they went on to have children, it would carry on through them. That was how their families were. And although in some aspects it is religious based, it's not, because you have a variation of different practices in Islam and different beliefs and traditions. Some families are more devout and more strict than others, whereas some are more lenient and they don't expect their children to marry someone that they don't know. They want their children to respect their religion, respect their traditions and practice it somewhat, but they also acknowledge that their children have their own minds and that they should be allowed to get into a relationship on their own terms with someone that they genuinely like. And although some arranged marriages have worked out significantly for a lot of people, I'm not trying to put a dampener on arranged marriages whatsoever. I actually know someone who married someone through an arranged marriage, and they are still married to this day and are very, very happy and went on to have a family. But when they had their family, they didn't expect their children to honour the same tradition. If they wanted to, the option was there. However, they also acknowledged that their children have their own minds, and if they wanted to be in a relationship with someone else, someone that they just met and naturally went on to like, and then get engaged and get married, then that was fine too, and I think that's great. So one of the main reasons I want to actually cover this case, aside from the fact that it hasn't been covered enough for me, it's just to educate a little on Muslim beliefs. There is a lot of negativity that surrounds Muslims and their beliefs and traditions, and that is not okay. Although what these two people did, which was, as they say, it was in the name of religion, it was not. What these two people did, they did in anger and nothing else. There are good people, good and bad people in every country, culture, religion and race. And sometimes when someone who belongs to a certain community or culture, race, if they do something bad, something illegal, then sometimes it reflects a lot on the community or culture or race that they belong to. And that's not right. Every person is different, and the decisions that a person makes should solely reflect on them and nothing else. So that is just what I want us all to be mindful of when I dive in a bit deeper into this case. So now I'm just going to dive in. I'm just going to go right back to the beginning and talk a little bit about Shafelea's background. Shafilea Ahmed was born on the 14th of July 1986. She was born in Bradford in West Yorkshire in the UK. Like I said, her parents originated from Pakistan, and her parents, they come from a village called, I'm going to butcher this, but Uttam in Pakistan. And Shafelea's parents, Iftikhar, her father, and Fazana, her mother, they were actually first cousins, which wasn't very uncommon for first cousins to promise to marry each other. Well, yeah, to be promised to marry each other when they are older. Both of them come from an incredibly strict and devout Islamic family. Fazana particularly, she was raised to become a housewife, to serve her husband and inevitably serve her family. Her sole purpose was to cook and to clean and to look after everyone within her household. She wasn't allowed to, well, she was allowed, she wasn't taught that she should go to work and basically have a life outside of her family. Her life was supposed to just be her family. And this isn't just a tradition amongst Muslim families. This is a tradition that not even that long ago was common amongst every culture, even Western cultures. I personally think it's an outdated tradition. Don't get me wrong, nothing against housewives. I'm basically a housewife right now. I'm not at work at the minute, well, other than doing this, of course. This is my job, and being a mother as well, it is the hardest job you could probably ever have. And I have nothing against it. I absolutely love being at home, and I love being able to spend all those precious little moments with my son. And I think that if you can afford to stay at home, if you and your partner can afford for you to stay at home so that you can look after your children and you can do all the housework and everything, that's totally fine. There is nothing wrong with that whatsoever. What I do think is wrong is that women, up until not that long ago, were taught that their sole purpose was to be a housewife and to breed children. That is something I don't agree with. Women, people in general, are so much more than that. You should be able to have a life outside of your family. You should be able to go out and take art classes or dance classes, or go out and have lunch with your friends, or do whatever you want to do when you want to do it. You shouldn't be taught that the only thing that you should do and you belong to is to be at home to cook and clean for your husband and family. I don't think that's right whatsoever. But aside from my feministic beliefs, sorry, I've had to take my glasses off because they just absolutely do my head in, and they're just not sitting well on my face at all today. I'm probably going to get the worst headache, but it's okay. So Shafelea's father, Iftikhar, he kind of rejected his family's beliefs, and he became more interested in Western cultures and beliefs, and he just that kind of lifestyle. And in, I think it was the early 80s, he actually went travelling in Copenhagen, and this is when he met and fell in love with a woman named Vivi. And shortly afterwards they got married. They were like completely in love and really happy, and then she ended up being pregnant and gave birth to a little boy. As you can imagine, Iftikhar's family were not happy about this arrangement whatsoever. They wanted him to marry a Muslim girl, and he had always been promised to marry his cousin Fazana. But Iftikhar did not want to do that. He wanted to have a family organically, on his own terms, and he had that, and he was very happy with that. And his family never made any effort to come over and visit their new grandchild and their son's wife, and they never wanted her to come over to Pakistan either. So I can imagine that that potentially caused a lot of problems within the relationship as well. So 4 years later, when I've seen conflicting information about this, I've seen that apparently it was Iftikhar's mother was dying and his grandmother. I've seen more that it was his grandmother, so I'm just going to say grandmother. So Iftikhar's grandmother was dying. So Iftikhar flew over to Pakistan to go and visit his dying grandmother, and while she was on her deathbed, she reminded Iftikhar of his promise to marry Fazana. This had been arranged since he was young, so he was expected to honour this tradition and marry Fazana. And he was not allowed to leave Pakistan until he did so. So they planned to get married, so they were pretty much engaged. And Fazana could pretty much tell that Iftikhar's heart was just not in it, and he was in two minds. He wanted to just go back to Copenhagen and be with his family, but then he had his other family that were guilt tripping him and making him feel bad and reminding him or that he needed to honour this tradition. So he just didn't know what to do. He was conflicted completely, and he pretty much decided that he just didn't want to do it. He was out. So Fazana decided to guilt trip Iftikhar, and she threatened to commit suicide if he did not marry her. And Iftikhar obviously was horrified by this and did not want this to happen, so he agreed. And him and Fazana got married in Pakistan. So now he had two wives. So I don't think his family were bothered that their son was committing bigamy as long as he honoured their tradition. So yes, they were married, and then Iftikhar flew back over to Copenhagen without Fazana, and he obviously didn't tell Vivi about this originally, and he sort of said to Vivi, like, look, I think we should start a new life, I think we should move to the UK. So they did, and they moved to the UK, and they moved to, I think it was Bradford or Warrington. I think it's Bradford. So they moved over to the UK, and everything was great for the first few weeks, and then there's a knock at the door, and it's not only, so it's no one other than Fazana. She walks up at the door and she is pregnant. So Iftikhar obviously must have been really freaked out and didn't really know what to do. He didn't tell Vivi about this initially. He just told Vivi that Fazana was his cousin, which, to be fair, he wasn't lying. She is his cousin. So he just said, this is my cousin. and I think she like stayed with him for a little bit, and then shortly afterwards a health professional turned up and it was all revealed that Fazana was actually Iftikhar's wife and she was pregnant with their first child. Vivi, as you can imagine, was fuming about this. So she took their son and she moved back to Copenhagen and never spoke to Iftikhar again. So Iftikhar and Fazana, they just decided to try and make the best of a somewhat bad situation, and shortly afterwards, on July the 14th, 1986, they welcomed their first child, Shafilea. They then go on to have 4 other children, a boy and 3 girls. They then moved, the whole family moved to Warrington, where they resided until, sadly, Shafelea's death. So whilst growing up in this household, it was a very strict household. Not a very loving one either. Neither Iftikhar or Fazana had any idea how to show their children love and affection. They just had some kind of unrealistic and very conservative expectations for their children. Fazana took her job as a housewife incredibly seriously, and she expected all of her daughters to follow suit. Specifically Shafilea, because she was the eldest, and she just wanted Shafilea to be the same. She wanted her to marry someone when she got to about 17 and then move in with her husband and then basically just spend her life serving her husband. However, when Shafilea was in school, she kind of rejected her parents' beliefs a lot. She obviously went to school with people, with others that were not from Muslim families, and they kind of had somewhat more lenient lifestyles. You know, they were allowed to go to work, they were allowed to paint their nails, they were allowed to not obviously do what they want, but they had a more flexible kind of lifestyle, whereas Shafilea was literally allowed to go to school and that was it, and she'd have to go home. And she had no kind of sense of privacy from her family at all. I don't think she was allowed a mobile phone. She had to share a bedroom with her siblings, and she just didn't have much of, well, she wasn't even able to have a social life whatsoever. She was expected to go to school and then come home and help her mother with the cooking and the cleaning. Iftikhar and Fazana, they were very strict, physically as well. They would physically discipline their children, even for some of the most minuscule things, like dropping some juice on the floor, which is something that you could pretty much just be like, don't do that. You know, or like, don't do that again, or be careful. But no, they would get beaten, and dependent on their mood, they could get quite severely beaten for something very minuscule. And most of the beatings were directed more towards Shafilea. I don't know whether this was because they expected more from Shafilea because she was the eldest. I think in most families, the eldest child is always treated a bit, not harsher, but you're a bit tougher on the eldest child, because you have certain expectations for your eldest, and you expect them to, you know, be a good role model for, and to know better, and to be a good role model for the younger siblings, so they sort of know how to behave. But obviously most families don't beat their children, and they shouldn't. I don't agree with it whatsoever. Like my mum, for example, with me, I am the eldest, and she was always a bit harder on me, just not overly strict, just a bit stricter with me than she was with my youngest brothers. And I think it was just because I was the eldest and I was expected to set certain examples for my siblings, and I do think that's quite normal. But obviously, like beating your child daily for very minuscule things, I think beating your child anyway should not happen, but especially if it's something so minor, that is not okay. So Shafilea would often coming to school with bruises and marks all over her, and her teachers and friends become quite concerned. But Iftikhar and Fazana, they kind of started to get a bit clever, and they thought that, you know, if they did beat her, which they did daily, then they would just keep Shafilea off for a few days and wait for the bruises and marks to fade so that no one would question it. And then on one particular day, a teacher actually called up to make sure everything was okay and to see what was wrong with Shafilea. And I think Iftikhar answered the phone and he kind of just made up a load of excuses, and the teacher just kept asking to speak to Shafilea, and he kept putting it off and was just like making up excuses as to why she couldn't come to the phone. But then this teacher, God bless her, just kept pushing for it. And Shafilea come on the phone and the teacher was asking if she was okay, and then she actually said to Shafilea, "Should I be worried?" And Shafilea just said yes and put the phone down. So when Shafilea, I think she was about 16, she started going to work. And her parents were not happy about this whatsoever. But most of Shafilia's friends were working. She wanted to kind of have her own sense of freedom and independence and her own money. So she started going to work, and her parents would always, they would drop her off, they would pick her up, they would make sure that she would literally just go to school and to work, and that would be it. So when Shafilea was 16 as well, she went on to study her A-levels at sixth form, which her parents, again, were not happy about this. She didn't feel like she needed to extend her education. But Shafilea, she wanted to go to university. She wanted to become a solicitor. Her parents hated this, and they were constantly saying to her, "You do not need to go to college, you don't need to go to university, you don't need to be a solicitor. All you need to do is to be a wife, and that is it." But Shafilea didn't want to do that. She wanted to work. She wanted to have a good job. She wanted to be able to afford her first home and her first car, and then meet someone organically and then maybe move in with them and get married to them when she wanted. She just wanted a normal life. She didn't want this life that was being forced upon her. After a little while, Shafilia's parents, they started getting sick of Shafilia's behaviour. They were constantly beating her. She had such poor attendance because they would beat her so brutally that she would be covered head to toe in bruises and marks, that they would keep her off school. Well, sixth form. And this caused Shafilea, she didn't want to be in that home anymore. So Shafilea, on a few occasions, actually ran away. And leading up to this, she would just get some clothes every few days, and she would, like, I think she'd put them in her locker, and she'd just gradually do it so that obviously she didn't just grab a whole suitcase and then run, because then it would look more obvious that way. So she was just doing it gradually over time, and this time she was quite successful, and she got all of her stuff together. She went with her friend, and I don't know where they went, but they drove away for a few days. So she was out of there. She was happy. She felt free. She felt liberated. She just wanted to be out of that hellhole. And then eventually the police tracked her down because they got a call from a very devastated and worried Fazana and Iftikhar. So the police returned Shafilea back to the home that she was trying to escape from. So she went back, and the abuse and torment just continued. And after this attempt, this is when Iftikhar and Fazana felt like they needed to turn it up a gear. And they decided that they weren't going to put off the arranged marriage any longer, and they were going to marry her off now. So they planned to fly her to Pakistan. Shafilea, as you can imagine, was like, no, this is not happening. I'm not going. I'm not getting married. She was being promised to marry her 25-year-old cousin. Shafilea was only 16 at this point. So that's what they were going to do. That was their plan. They were determined, and they were going to make it happen. but Shafilea just refused. She flatly refused to get up and get on that plane. So Iftikhar decided to go to his GP and complain of being sleep deprived, which is when he was prescribed with some very strong sleeping tablets. And the day of the flight, Fazana crushed up more than the expected dose of these sleeping tablets, put them in a drink and gave to Shafilea. So they got her on the plane, which this is what is quite mind-blowing to me as well. It's like, how did the people who work at the airport, how did they not suspect anything or find out weird? Don't get me wrong, I know it's not their job, but it's like she had no recollection of going to the airport, getting on the plane. If you had someone that was unconscious and trying to get on the plane, how would you not know? Like, why would you not question that? Why would you allow that? It's like if you have a couple of drinks, you get thrown off the plane. Not thrown off it, but you're not allowed on the plane. So if you got someone unconscious, how are they allowed? Unless, I don't know. I can't comprehend that whatsoever, because they had to have given them to her to get her to the airport because she flatly refused to go. Like, she knew if she went to the airport she was going to Pakistan, so they must have done it before she even went to the airport. So unless she got a private jet, I don't really understand how that was allowed whatsoever. It's just, that's a part of this whole story that I just find really strange. So yeah, anyway, so they go to Pakistan and Shafilea obviously soon comes to, and she is just devastated. As you can imagine, she knows what's going to happen. She is completely against it. She just does not want this life. So they are currently staying with relatives. And on one night, Shafilea decides she just doesn't want to live anymore. She can't live this life that's being forced upon her. And she just couldn't see any way out. She tried to escape numerous times and she always ended up back at that home. So on one night, Shafilea decided she didn't want to live anymore, and she grabbed a bottle of bleach and drank it, which I think just goes to show the extent of her feeling and how much she really was. I think when you attempt to commit suicide, obviously you don't want to be there, you don't want to be here anymore anyway, but especially when it's something as harmful and as painful as drinking bleach. And if you do survive, it's a long, lengthy, painful process of recovery. So that just goes to show the extent of her feeling towards not wanting this life, which is just incredibly sad. And her parents did not give a shit. They did not care that she had just tried to commit suicide. If my son, God forbid, I hope this never happens, but if he ever felt depressed, so much so that he tried to take his life, it would just absolutely break my heart, and I would do everything in my power to ensure that that never happens again. And I would try my utmost to be there, emotionally, physically, everything, to be there for him. And they wasn't. And then the Iftikhar and Fazana learned that this cousin Shafilea was supposed to be getting married to, he wasn't interested anymore. He felt like she was, I think in his words, damaged goods, because she had attempted to commit suicide, so he was no longer interested. He didn't want to marry her anymore. So Iftikhar and Fazana were fuming about this, and they blamed and took it out on Shafilea even more for bringing shame onto their family. So they were so angry and just decided to just leave Shafilea there. She obviously, as you can imagine, she had survived this attempt, and she she had burned all of her insides, so she wasn't able to drink, she wasn't able to eat, she was salivating, she was probably in all sorts of kind of pain. She needed to go to a hospital, and her parents flatly refused to take Shafilea to a hospital. So they just left Shafilea with their relatives, and they got on the first plane and flew back to England. Shafilea was staying with relatives, and they become increasingly concerned of Shafilia's health and her state of mind. And they rang up Iftikhar and Fazana and told them and said, look, you need to get her to a hospital, she's really not well. So I'm not sure if they flew her back, like they flew back to get her, or just flew Shafilea over, but Shafilea returned to England, but she was not given any kind of professional medical care at all. They said that they were going to look after her at home, but they never did. But eventually Shafilea just naturally recovered on her own, luckily. And Shafilea was she just wanted to get her life back to normal, and she just wanted to reconnect with all of her friends. She wanted to go back to sixth form. She just wanted to try and enjoy her life again, and just try to forget everything that had previously happened and try to take the best from it all. So whilst Shafilea was 16, a few different services actually got involved. Social services got involved at one point because I think the school complained, because obviously Shafilea was coming in with bruises, she was missing a lot of school, she had told her friends that she was getting beaten daily. And social services come out, they come and saw the family, they ask their standard questions, and both parents were basically just said that it was all a lie, it wasn't true. She was just a difficult child, and that was that. So social services didn't take it any further, and they just kind of left it at that. There was one particular case when Fazana actually strangled Shafilea so badly that she left bruising all over her neck. Obviously, when she attempted to commit suicide with the bleach, she had such bad scarring and marks. Well, her whole throat was just so severely damaged, and even though she had got better, she wasn't fully recovered when she returned to school, returned to sixth form. Teachers become quite concerned about that. And Shafilea actually wrote to the local council begging for emergency housing, stating that she got beaten daily, that it was cramped housing, and nothing was done. So she had to continue staying in that household. Her parents would take money out of her account constantly without Shafilia's say-so. They would track her. She wasn't allowed to go out with any of her friends. She wasn't allowed to go out with boys. They would just constantly track her. And they would, anytime Shafilea got home from work or from school, they would just ask her continuously who she'd been with, what she'd been doing. They were just becoming increasingly possessive. And the abuse just got more and more severe. And then on September the 11th, 2003, Shafilea left for work. And the outfit that Shafilea had left to go to work in, Fazana was not happy about this. I think she just wore just standard clothes. I think she just wore a t-shirt that had short sleeves, so her arms weren't covered. I think she just wore like jeans, but she wore white stiletto heels. And Fazana, she wanted Shafilea to cover everything, and she felt like if she showed a bit of skin, then she looked like a whore, basically. So Shafilea left for work. I don't know if Fazana actually said anything to her initially, and Shafilea went to work. Fazana and Iftikhar went to go and pick, no, I think Fazana went to go and pick Shafilea up, and she was still absolutely fuming about the outfit that her daughter had left to go to work in. So then they returned home, and Shafilea wasn't seen for a week, and none of her family reported her missing. Then her friends began to be quite concerned, so did her school, and then the police were alerted. So when the police come to question Fazana and Iftikhar, they just basically didn't seem fazed. They kind of just said, you know, she's run away before. I think she's just run away. She doesn't seem very happy at home. She's just a troublesome teenager. That's basically all there is to it. And the police were quite, I think they were initially very sceptical. They did think that Iftikhar and Fazana did have something to do with it. Obviously, they didn't have a lot of evidence at this point. They didn't have much to go on. They didn't know that it was a homicide at this point. They just put it down to her being a runaway. So they kind of just continued with their searches and just put it down to that initially. So they carried on trying to search all the local areas, local parks, rivers, all those kind of generic searches, and a nationwide hunt was launched. So after detectives learned of Shafelea's suicide attempt, Iftikhar and Fazana just said that their excuse was that one night there was a power cut in Pakistan and Shafilea went down to get a drink and she accidentally took a drink of bleach. Obviously, detectives did not believe this. They called bullshit straight away. Like I said, they only really had circumstantial evidence. They didn't really have anything concrete, so they kind of had to take their word for it, but they were still very skeptical, and they did believe that this may have been an honour killing. I don't want to say common, but it has been known that honour killings have happened throughout Eastern cultures. When a family member or a person brings shame upon their family, then that person is generally murdered. So this is what the police, this is what they thought, but they just didn't have a body, they didn't have anything to sort of go off of it. However, they trusted their gut instinct, and all that they could really do at this point was to put microphones and all that up in the Ahmed household. And this is when they hear quite an incriminating conversation between Fazana and Iftikhar. They didn't specifically say that Shafilea was dead or that she had been murdered, but they did say hopefully they won't find any forensics in the car. You can get away with murder in this country. They told the children not to say anything. They didn't go into specifics. They didn't say what not to say. They just said, do not say anything. So the police, they took them in for questioning because this was quite weird. It was quite suspicious. So they brought them in and they just said that they just made up excuses. Both of them were very manipulative, and they kind of just blamed the police on being racist. And then in February of 2004, a body was found. It was found in the River Kent near Sedgwick in Cumbria, and it was the body of a young female. This body had been, because it had been there for about 5-6 months, it was quite badly decomposed, as you can imagine. So the only way that they could identify this body was by jewellery. So the body was then identified as Shafilea Ahmed. They couldn't identify how she was killed or what had happened. And then a second post-mortem was done as well to see if they could pick up anything else, but still nothing else was found. They still couldn't identify how Shafilea was murdered. So Iftikhar, Fazana and 5 other members of the Ahmed family were arrested for questioning. However, shortly afterwards they were released because they just didn't have enough to go on. So during the coroner's inquest in 2008, it was stated that Shafelea's death was an unlawful killing. She had been taken from her home and murdered. But again, police officers just could not, they just didn't have the evidence. I think they had that gut feeling that the parents or some family members were involved. They just didn't have that concrete evidence. They didn't have no DNA. They didn't even have the cause of death or the exact time of death. So they just did not know, they just didn't have enough evidence to fully arrest the parents. So the case just went cold for quite a while. And then on 2010, the police finally had a breakthrough. So on the 25th of August 2010, Shafelea's youngest sister, Alicia, I think she was in university and she was struggling a bit for money. So her and her friends decided to come up with this plan to stage a robbery in her family home. So Alicia would be in the house with her mum, her dad and her siblings, and then her friends would come in, tie them all up and rob the house. However, it wasn't thought through very well, and they tied up all the other family members other than Alicia. So mum and dad were a bit, why have you not been tied up? So they kind of called bullshit quite quickly, and they knew what was sort of happening. So they called the police, and the police come and arrested Alicia. Whilst Alicia was being questioned, Alicia actually said to the police officer, look, I need to talk to you about another matter. And this is when she brings some very interesting information to the police officers about her deceased sister, Shafilea. She tells the police officers that on the night of September the 11th, 2003, her and all of her siblings witnessed her mother and her father murder her sister. So on that night, Shafilea, her mother had gone to pick her up. I think Fazana was screaming and shouting at Shafilea, calling her a whore, calling her a slut, saying that she brought shame onto the family, and she brought her home, told Iftikhar about what she was wearing, and then Iftikhar was beating Shafilea so severely. And then in the end, he got on top of Shafilea, and Fazana actually said to Iftikhar, just finish it here, which then Iftikhar proceeded to get a bag and put it over Shafelea's head and suffocate her to death. Alicia didn't really know what had happened then. Her mother and father had said to Alicia and all of her other siblings, if you say anything, you will meet the same fate. So obviously they were all terrified, that's why they didn't say anything. So all the other siblings went to their room, and Alicia recalls seeing her father walk out of the house with a body-sized bag, and they left in the car and then come back a little while after, and Shafilea was never seen again. Then obviously Iftikhar and Fazana, they were arrested. The police then questioned all of the other siblings, and then a witness come forward as well who was quite young at the time, and he was a friend of one of the other siblings, and he actually had like diary entries of some of the things that this sibling would say to him about the kind of treatment that Shafilea and all of them would endure, and about the murder that they had all witnessed. Obviously he was quite young at the time, and I don't know, for whatever reason he didn't come forward until this was brought to light, and he felt like it was valuable, which it was. So Iftikhar and Fazana's trial began on May 2012. Fazana, she pleaded not guilty initially. She stated she had nothing to do with it. It was all Iftikhar. She had no idea Shafilea had even died. However, just before the trial, she decided to change her plea and change it to guilty, but on the terms of manslaughter, that the intention was never to kill Shafilea. However, that didn't fly at all. I think she was just hoping for a lighter sentence, but they were both found guilty and they were sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum of 25 years. The police were also kind of looking into the theory that maybe someone else was involved as well. Someone else may have helped them in disposing of Shafelea's body, but I don't think they really had any evidence to suggest this or any leads. It's just a theory that they had, and I think they kind of explored it, but they didn't find anything. So once Iftikhar and Fazana were sentenced, all of the siblings wanted nothing to do with their parents then. I think they finally felt like they were free. They were free from the constant abuse that they had endured all their lives. However, apart from one of the daughters, she still maintains regular contact with both of her parents. I'm sorry if you can hear that noise. That's my son. He's just woken up from his nap. Look! You're going to be on YouTube! So this is my son. He's a bit grumpy because he's just woken up from his nap. And he's still in his Christmas pyjamas. I've not dressed him yet. I'm about to, Mum. So yes, that is it for this week's case. It is a really, really sad one. It was really hard to cover. I'm glad that I've covered it because I feel like I said, it just hasn't been covered enough. It definitely needs to be spoken about a lot more. And like I said previously, I don't want to see any kind of negativity towards any kind of religion, really. Especially this one in particular because of this case. Like I said, it is no reflection on Islam. It's just solely a reflection on Iftikhar and Fazana. So, thank you so much for watching. And I will be back next week for another episode of Toxic Crime Tuesdays. Do not miss it. It's probably the craziest case I've ever researched. It's going to be a mad one. So, yeah, please don't miss it. And I will see you guys next Tuesday. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for subscribing. I appreciate you all so much. And please follow my Instagram because I always put regular updates about what cases I'm going to be covering and if I'm going to miss one as well. I'm really sorry for missing last week's. I'm going to try and be as consistent as I can. So I will see you guys next week. So stay safe, stay spooky. Bye guys.